The Obsidian Lattice does not breathe. It wheezes. It is a gargantuan, jagged skeletal structure of carbon fiber and ancient steel, clinging to the gravity well of Ignis IV like a tick on a dying beast. Outside the thick, pitted viewports of the maintenance sectors, the pulsar spins in a frantic, murderous dance, lashing the station with rhythmic pulses of radiation that make the very marrow of your bones feel like it is humming a tune composed in hell. My name is Kaelen Voss, and I am a professional ghost. By standard galactic time, it was 0400 hours, though time is a fluid, meaningless concept when you live in a metal box where the only day-night cycle is the flicker of failing fluorescent tubes. I was hunched over a primary thermal coupling in Habitat Wing 9, my fingers slick with a mixture of recycled lubricant and my own sweat. The coupling was a stubborn piece of junk, a remnant of a pre-war era that should have been decommissioned 40 years ago. But in the lattice, we do not throw things away. We patch, we solder, and we pray to gods we no longer believe in that the seals hold for another week. "Come on, you rust bucket," I muttered, the words barely a rasp in the dry, ozone-heavy air. "Just give me a green light." The diagnostic slate in my hand flickered between a defiant red and a hesitant amber. I adjusted the Torx wrench, feeling the subtle vibration of the pulsar's latest pulse through the floor plating. The lattice groaned in response, a deep, metallic moan that vibrated in my teeth. Being a thermal scavenger meant I was the station's janitor for the things no one wanted to touch. I fixed the heaters in the slums so the refugees would not freeze into statues during the long shadow cycles. It was honest work, or at least it was work that kept the Iron Tithe Corporation from looking too closely at my forged identification papers. A tiny, flickering green light finally sparked on the coupling. I exhaled, a long, shaky breath that tasted of copper and stagnant oxygen. That was one more day of life for the 300 people living in this block. I packed my tools into my worn kit, my movements practiced and efficient. I did not linger. In the lattice, if you stayed in one place too long, you became part of the scenery, and scenery eventually got scrapped. I made my way back toward my apartment, Unit 412 Delta. It was a long walk through corridors that smelled of wet dogs and unwashed humanity. I passed a group of Iron Tithe enforcers, their black tactical armor gleaming under the dim red emergency lights. They were the apex predators here, keeping the peace with stun batons and the constant threat of airlock excursions. I lowered my head, rounding my shoulders, becoming the invisible engineer they expected to see. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running across his throat, watched me pass. His gaze was heavy, suspicious. I kept my stride even. I was a ghost. Ghosts do not trip. Ghosts do not have heart rates that spike. When I reached the door to my unit, I paused. The magnetic lock was acting up again. I swiped my key card 3 times before the hiss of equalizing pressure signaled entry. The apartment was a masterpiece of claustrophobic efficiency. It was 12 square meters of living space, containing 2 sleeping pods, a kitchenette that could barely fit a single hot plate, and a sonic shower that worked twice a week if you kicked the intake valve just right. It was also occupied. The temperature in the room was a balmy 24 degrees Celsius. I frowned, dropping my toolkit by the door. I had set the thermostat to 19 before my shift. 19 was the survival median. 24 was an indulgence we could not afford. Lyraen was standing by the nutrient synthesizer, her back to me. She was tall, her frame slender and elegant, in a way that seemed entirely out of place among the rusted bulkheads of the lattice. She wore the standard-issue gray overalls of a hydroponics cleaner, but she wore them like they were silk. Her dark hair was tied back in a severe functional knot, and around her neck, gleaming with a dull, clinical light, was the suppression mandate collar. "You shifted the thermal load again," I said, my voice flat. I did not mean for it to sound like an accusation, but fatigue has a way of sharpening the edges of your words. Lyraen did not turn around immediately. She waited for the synthesizer to chirp, signaling the completion of 2 bulbs of lukewarm, gray protein mash. She turned then, her violet eyes calm and inscrutable. In the dim light, her skin looked unnervingly pale, almost translucent. "The hydroponics vats were chilled today, Kaelen," she said. Her voice was soft, possessing a rhythmic quality that always made me think of distant bells. My internal regulation struggled to compensate. 24 degrees is a luxury for you, but for me, it is a necessity for basic cellular function. We are running on a deficit, Lyraen, I countered, moving past her to grab one of the bulbs. The Iron Tithe is monitoring the energy draw in this sector. If we spike, they send a tech priest to check the meter. If they check the meter, they check the occupants. She looked at me, her expression unchanging. Yet I felt a ripple of something, frustration perhaps, emanating from her. The ethereals were like that. Even with the collars on, they carried an aura that felt like static electricity against your skin. I am aware of the risks, she replied. I am also aware that if my core temperature drops below 32 degrees, my luminous echo begins to fracture. The collar cannot suppress a biological collapse. I sighed, leaning against the cold metal of the wall. I took a sip of the protein mash. It tasted like wet cardboard in despair. I did not want to argue. I was too tired for the politics of survival. For 2 years we had lived in this uneasy truce. She was a refugee from the Opaline sovereignty, a civilization that had been systematically dismantled by the Iron Tithe over the last decade. I was a man who had seen enough war to know that helping her was a death sentence. Yet I had done it anyway. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just because she was the only person on this station who did not look at me with either pity or malice. Just keep it at 21, I muttered, a compromise. 21 is acceptable, she said, her voice softening slightly. She sat at the tiny fold-down table, her movements fluid and silent. We ate in a silence that was heavy with the things we did not say. I did not ask her about her shift in the vats, and she did not ask me about the ghosts I chased in my sleep. I watched the pulsar flashes through the small reinforced porthole. Every few seconds, the room would be bathed in a harsh, blue light, followed by absolute darkness. It was the rhythm of our lives, a heartbeat of radiation. You are thinking about the past again, Lyraen said, not looking up from her bulb. Your aura is heavy. It smells of ash. I stiffened. Even with the collar, she could sense the fringes of my mind. It was a byproduct of her biology, a sensitivity to the electromagnetic fields of human thought. I am thinking about the thermal couplings in Wing 9, I lied. They are slag. The whole station is falling apart, Lyraen. One of these days, the lattice is just going to stop wheezing and let the pulsar have us. Then we should be glad for the warmth while we have it, she said. She stood up, her shift over, and retreated to her sleeping pod. The door hissed shut, leaving me alone in the cramped kitchen. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty bulb of protein. My hands were finally still, but the hum of the pulsar was inside me now. I stood up and moved to my own pod. I needed sleep. I needed to dream of nothing. But as I lay there in the dark, the rhythm of the station seemed to pulse in sync with my own heart. I thought of EOS 7. I thought of the screens turning red as the defense grid dissolved. I thought of the screams that were silenced by the vacuum. I am a ghost, I reminded myself, and ghosts do not feel the cold. The blackout happened at 0330 hours. It was not the usual brownout, the flickering stutter of a station struggling to balance its load. This was absolute. One moment, the faint ambient hum of the life support systems was a comforting backdrop to my fitful sleep. The next, the silence was so sudden and heavy, it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I sat up in my pod, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In the lattice, silence is the sound of death. It means the scrubbers have stopped. It means the gravity plating is on its last reserves. It means the pulsar is no longer being deflected. Lyraen, I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the void. There was no answer. I fumbled for the manual release on my pod door. The lever was cold, unyielding. I threw my shoulder against it, a surge of adrenaline masking the ache in my joints. With a grinding protest of metal on metal, the door slid open. The apartment was pitch black. The emergency lights, which should have kicked in within 3 seconds, remained dead. That meant the sector relay had blown. We were in a total blind spot. Lyraen, are you there? I asked again, my hand finding the wall to guide me. I knew the layout of the room by heart. 12 steps to the kitchen, 5 to the bathroom door, 8 to her pod. I heard a sound then. It was not a voice. It was a vibration, a low melodic hum that seemed to resonate in the very air. It was beautiful and terrifying, like the sound of a glass harp being played in a cathedral of ice. I moved toward the sound, my fingers brushing the frame of the bathroom door. I had thought it was closed, but it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, expecting only more darkness. Instead, I was blinded. The small, cramped bathroom was filled with an ethereal, shifting radiance. It was not the harsh blue of the pulsar or the sickly yellow of the station lights. It was a kaleidoscope of silver, sapphire, and a deep, pulsing violet. I froze, my hand still on the doorframe. Lyraen was there. She was submerged in the small, recycled water basin, her back to me. But she was no longer the pale, gray-clad woman I knew. She had removed her overalls, and more importantly, she had removed the collar. Her skin was a canvas of living light. Beneath the surface, intricate patterns of bioluminescence flowed like liquid mercury, tracing the lines of her muscles, the curve of her spine, the delicate arch of her neck. The patterns were not static. They shifted and swirled in response to her breathing, a visual representation of a heartbeat. The room vibrated with the frequency of her light. It was the luminous echo in its purest, most unguarded form. She was in a trance, a deep, regenerative state that ethereals use to heal their ravaged nervous systems. In this state, they were most vulnerable, their souls literally bared to the world. I should have turned away. I knew the laws. I knew the profound taboo of seeing an ethereal without their mask. To witness the echo was to look into the private sanctum of their very being. It was an accidental intrusion into a holy place. But I could not move. It was the most magnificent thing I had ever seen. In a life spent among rusted metal and gray ash, this was a glimpse of a universe that was still vibrant, still capable of breathtaking beauty. The light was not just visual, it was emotional. I could feel her peace, her ancient sorrow, and a shimmering, resilient hope that defied the darkness of the lattice. Then the rhythm changed. The sapphire light suddenly spiked into a jagged, frantic crimson. The melodic hum turned into a sharp, discordant wail. Lyraen's eyes snapped open. Not the violet I was used to, but solid, glowing orbs of terrified white. She sensed me. The crimson light exploded across her skin, a frantic broadcast of primal terror. She scrambled up from the basin, the glowing water cascading off her body like liquid stars. She tried to cover herself, her hands trembling, but the light was a traitor, screaming her fear to the very bulkheads. "Adrian?" "No," she gasped, her voice a fractured echo of the bell-like tone I knew. I reacted instinctively. I did not look at her body with the eyes of a scavenger. I did not recoil in fear of the alien. I saw only her terror, a mirror of the fear I had felt on the decks of EO7. "I am sorry," I shouted, the words tearing from my throat. "I did not see. The power is out." I grabbed the door and slammed it shut, plunging myself back into the absolute suffocating darkness of the hallway. I stood there, my back against the cold metal, my heart feeling like it was trying to break through my ribs. The image of the crimson light was seared into my retinas, a ghost burn of her panic. I heard a muffled sobbing sound from behind the door. It was the sound of a soul that had been stripped bare and found wanting. "Lyraen," I whispered, my forehead resting against the door. "I am so sorry. It was an accident." I mistook the door in the dark. I saw nothing. It was a lie, a stupid, transparent lie. The light had been bright enough to drown out the pulsar itself. Minutes passed. The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was sharp, like a shard of glass. Then with a sudden, violent flicker, the emergency lights in the corridor outside snapped on. A thin line of dim red light bled under the apartment door. A few seconds later, our internal utility lights groaned to life, casting a sickly yellow glow over the kitchen. The power was back. The warden array had recovered. The bathroom door remained closed. I sat heavily on the floor, my head in my hands. I felt a wave of profound guilt, a cold, leaden weight in my stomach. I, who valued my own privacy to the point of obsession, had committed the ultimate violation against the only person I cared about. I had seen her truth, and the truth was too beautiful for a place as ugly as this. Finally, the door hissed open. Lyraen stepped out. She was dressed in her gray overalls again, the suppression mandate collar locked firmly around her neck. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves around her shoulders, shielding her face. She was pale again, the light extinguished, hidden beneath the dull surface of her skin. She was trembling. Her hands were clenched so tightly at her sides that her knuckles were white. She did not look at me. She walked to the window and stared out at the pulsar, which was now spinning with a renewed, aggressive energy. "You saw," she whispered. Her voice was flat, devoid of the melody. "Yes," I admitted, my voice rough. The lie was pointless. "I saw the echo." She closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat, I saw a faint violet pulse at her temple, a ghost of the light trying to break through the chemical inhibitors of the collar. "In my culture," she said, her voice trembling, "to be an unwilled witness to the echo is a crime of the soul. It is the end of privacy. It is the beginning of a bond that neither party asked for." "I do not want anything from you, Lyraen," I said, standing up slowly. "I do not want your secrets or your bond. I just want you to be safe. It was an accident. I will take what I saw to my grave, I promise you." She turned to look at me then. Her violet eyes were wide, searching my face with a desperate, analytical intensity. She was looking for the leering curiosity of the scavenger, the disgust of the human, or the greed of the traitor. I met her gaze directly. I did not look away. I allowed her to see my own ghost, the ash and the shadow I carried. I showed her the truth of my apology. "Your gaze," she murmured, her brow furrowing. "It is not hostile. You are not afraid." "Why should I be afraid of something so beautiful?" I asked. The words felt clumsy, but they were the only ones I had. Lyraen froze. A flicker, so fast I almost missed it, of warm, honeyed gold light sparked on her cheek, just above the line of the collar. It was a tiny, defiant pulse of joy, a resonance I had never seen before. She looked away quickly, the gold vanishing beneath the pale mask of her skin. She took a long, shaky breath, her shoulders losing some of their tension. "The power is restored," she said, her voice regaining some of its rhythm. "Yes," I said. "It seems so." She walked past me, her steps measured and deliberate, and entered her sleeping pod. The door hissed shut with a finality that echoed in the small room. I remained standing in the middle of the kitchen, the yellow light casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. I felt as if I had just touched a live wire in the station's core. Everything had changed. The truce was over. The silence between us was no longer a wall. It was a bridge, fragile and terrifying. What I did not know, what I could not have possibly known, was that 3 levels above us, in the cold, polished command spire of the Iron Tithe, a sensor had flagged an anomaly. The blackout had tripped a high-sensitivity atmospheric scanner in Sector 412. It had recorded a bioenergetic surge, a localized burst of luminous echo radiation that did not match any registered ethereal laborer. High Arshan Vane was at his desk, his eyes reflecting the data scrolling across his screen. He leaned forward, a thin, predatory smile touching his lips. He had been hunting for a royal signature for 3 years. He had searched the stars, the slums, and the battlefields. He had never thought to look in a thermal scavenger's apartment. "Found you?" he whispered to the flickering screen. I went to the nutrient synthesizer and started a fresh bulb of protein. My hands were finally steady. I thought of the silver and the sapphire, and the fleeting, hesitant spark of gold. I would not tell anyone. I would guard her secret as fiercely as I guarded my own. In the dark of the Obsidian Lattice, a ghost and an empress were now bound by a single respectful look, and the galaxy was about to catch fire. The morning after the blackout did not bring light. It brought a heavy, suffocating blanket of uncertainty. The Obsidian Lattice continued its slow, grinding rotation around Ignis IV, and the pulsar continued to lash us with its rhythmic cruelty. Every pulse felt like a hammer blow against the thin sheet of glass that was our shared reality. I sat at the small, fold-down table, a cooling bulb of synthetic tea in my hand. My head throbbed with the dull, persistent rhythm of a migraine, a gift from the sudden atmospheric shift during the power failure. The door to Lyraen's sleeping pod remained shut for 5 hours. I did not knock. I did not call out. I spent the time cleaning my torque wrenches for the third time that week, my fingers moving with a mechanical precision that my mind lacked. I was a man of systems, of logic gates and encrypted frequencies. But what I had seen in that bathroom did not fit into any schematic I possessed. It was a variable that broke the equation. When the door finally hissed open, the air in the room seemed to sharpen. Lyraen stepped out, her posture rigid, her face a mask of pale alabaster stillness. She had replaced the suppression mandate collar, and its clinical, white light hummed against the column of her throat. She looked at the tea, then at me. Her violet eyes were guarded, shielded by a layer of frost that had not been there before. "The tea is cold," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "I do not require tea," she replied, her tone as brittle as frozen glass. "I require clarity, Kaelen Voss. You saw the matriarchal sigil? You witnessed the resonance of a royal line. In my world, that makes you more than a witness. It makes you a participant in a destiny you are not prepared for." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the metal floor. "I am an engineer, Lyraen. I fix pipes. I patch leaks. I do not do destiny. Whatever happened last night, it stays in this room. I told you, I am a ghost. I have no interest in being a participant in anything other than my own survival." She moved closer, her presence a cold, static charge in the cramped space. "You are a liar," she whispered. "You speak of survival as if it were a solitary act. But your aura tells a different story. When you looked at me in the dark, you did not see an asset. You did not see a monster. You saw a person in pain, and you chose to close the door. That choice was not the act of a ghost. It was the act of a man who still remembers how to care." I turned away, the memory of EOS 7 stinging like a fresh burn. "You do not know what I remember." "I know enough," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I know that the iron tithe is hunting for a spike. They are hunting for the light you saw. And if they find it, they will not just take me, they will dismantle this entire sector to find the one who shielded me." She was right. I knew the corporate logic of the tithe. They were not just a company, they were an ecosystem of greed and surveillance. If Archon Vane had even a whisper of a royal signature on this station, the Lattice would become a slaughterhouse. "Then we need to change the game," I said, turning back to her. "We need to teach you how to be truly invisible, not just with a collar, but with your mind. You need to learn the art of the gray man." "The gray man?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "It is an old military doctrine," I explained, leaning against the kitchen counter. "It is about being so unremarkable, so perfectly integrated into the background, that the human eye simply refuses to register your presence. You have the stillness, Lyraen. You have the discipline. But you are too elegant. You move like someone who was born to be looked at. In the Lattice, that is a beacon." She looked down at her hands, the long, delicate fingers that were currently stained with the grime of the hydroponic vats. "I was born to be the light of my people, Kaelen. To hide is to deny my very existence. To hide is to live," I countered. "If you want to save your people, you have to be alive to do it." She was silent for a long time, the pulsar flashes illuminating the room in rhythmic blue stabs. Finally, she reached up and touched the side of the suppression collar. A faint click echoed in the silence. The clinical light died, and the collar fell away into her palm. The light returned instantly, but it was different now. It was a soft, steady, undulating azure, flowing over her skin like a calm ocean at twilight. It was the baseline, I realized, her neutral state. "If I am to learn your way," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a fierce intensity, "then you must learn mine. You must understand the cartography of the echo. You must know what the colors mean, so that you know when I am slipping." She held up her hand, the palm glowing with a gentle, pulsing blue. "This is peace," she said. "This is the rhythm of breath, of equilibrium. If you see this, I am in control." The blue shifted, deepening into a sharp, flickering violet that danced across her knuckles like static. "This is anxiety. This is the sound of a predator in the tall grass. It means I am scanning for threats. It means the system is under stress. Then the violet was swallowed by a warm, honeyed gold that seemed to radiate a faint physical heat. This is resonance, she whispered. This is trust. It is the color of a shared truth. It is rare, Kaelen. In the exile, I have not seen it for 10 years. I watched the gold light, feeling a strange, hollow ache in my chest. And the crimson? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Terror, she said, the gold vanishing instantly, replaced by a dull, aching gray-purple. Violation. The sound of a world ending. If you see that color, you do not talk. You do not wait. You run. I nodded, recording the frequencies in my mind. Peace, anxiety, resonance, terror. It was a simple enough code, but the complexity beneath it was staggering. She was offering me a map of her soul, a level of vulnerability that most humans would not share in a lifetime of marriage. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you are the only one who can see it, she said. The collar gags me, Kaelen. It traps my truth inside my own skin. But you see through the gag. If I am to hide, I need someone to tell me when the mask is slipping. I need a mirror that does not lie. I looked at her, the blue light of her skin reflected in the chrome of the kitchen faucet. We were two broken things, trying to build a shield out of our own scars. Fine, I said. We start with the walk. You move too smoothly. You move like a dancer. From now on, you shuffle, you hunch. You look at the floor plating as if it were the most interesting thing in the galaxy. You become a gear in the machine, Lyraen. Nothing more. For the next 4 hours, we practiced the art of being nothing. I taught her how to break her rhythm, how to use the shadows of the bulkheads to mask her silhouette, and how to control the micro-expressions that the ethereals use to communicate. It was a strange, intimate dance. I would correct the angle of her shoulders, and for a fleeting second, the gold light would spark at the point of contact before she suppressed it. You are a very good teacher, Kaelen Voss, she said, standing in the center of the room, her shoulders rounded, her hair messy, looking exactly like a tired, overworked janitor. I am a man who has spent 10 years learning how to be invisible, I replied. It is not a skill I am proud of. She looked at me, her violet eyes searching mine. You think that hiding is a weakness? You think that your silence is a cage? But you saved me with that silence. You saved me with your respect. Perhaps being a ghost is not about disappearing. Perhaps it is about choosing who you reveal yourself to. I had no answer for that. I picked up my toolkit and moved toward the door. I have a double shift in the cooling bays. Stay inside. Keep the thermostat at 21. And for the love of the stars, Lyraen, keep that collar on if anyone knocks. I will, she promised. I stepped out into the corridor, the hiss of the door behind me sounding like a long, weary sigh. I walked toward the maintenance lift, my mind a chaotic swirl of sapphire and gold. I was no longer just an engineer. I was a cartographer of a light that should not exist. And as I descended into the bowels of the lattice, I realized with a sudden, chilling certainty that the darkness was no longer enough to keep us safe. The iron tithe was coming. I could feel it in the vibration of the deck plating, in the nervous glances of the sector guards, and in the way the pulsar seemed to scream across the void. The hunt was on, and we were the only prey that mattered. As the lift doors opened to the humid, ozone-stinking depths of the cooling bays, I adjusted my wrench and rounded my shoulders. I was Kaelen Voss, thermal scavenger. I was a ghost, and if I had to, I would haunt this station until the pulsar burned out to keep the silver light from being extinguished. The raid began at 1400 hours on a Tuesday. In the Obsidian Lattice, Tuesdays were usually quiet. It was the day when the primary life support scrubbers underwent their weekly purge, filling the corridors with the scent of recycled lemon and industrial bleach. Most of the sector residents stayed in their pods to avoid the stinging vapor. It was the perfect time for a surgical strike. I was in the middle of a delicate recalibration of the primary coolant pump in Habitat Wing 7 when my wristcom vibrated with a sharp, insistent sequence. It was a localized emergency broadcast from the sector relay. Sector-wide health and safety inspection in progress. All residents of Habitat Wing 7 and 9 are ordered to remain in their units. Unauthorized movement will be met with lethal force. My blood turned to ice. This was not a routine check. A health and safety inspection was the Iron Tide's favorite euphemism for a door-kicking, sensor-sweeping raid. They were looking for the energy spike. They were looking for her. I dropped the calibration tool, my mind already running through the shortest route back to Unit 412 Delta. If I went through the main corridors, I would run straight into a wall of black tactical armor. I needed a different path. I grabbed a master override key from my belt and shoved it into the maintenance hatch behind the pump. The lock groaned, then clicked. I scrambled into the narrow, lightless crawl space of the ventilation ducts. The air here was hot and thick with the dust of 1,000 systems. But it was the only way to move without being seen by the Warden Array's sensors. I moved with a frantic, silent urgency, my knees scraping against the corrugated metal. Every pulse of the pulsar through the station's skin sounded like a warning bell. I could hear the muffled thuds of heavy boots on the decks below, the barking orders of enforcers, and the occasional scream of a resident being dragged from their pod. I reached the vent above my apartment and peered through the grating. The unit was dark, save for the flickering yellow utility light. Lyraen was standing in the center of the room, her back against the kitchen counter. She was wearing the collar, but even from 2 meters above, I could see the frantic, jagged violet light pulsing at the edges of her hair. She was terrified. The front door exploded inward. 2 enforcers in full Iron Tithe tactical gear burst into the room. Their long-barreled stun rifles swept the space. Behind them stepped a man I recognized instantly. It was Chief Enforcer Vark, a mountain of a man with a cybernetic eye that glowed with a cold, predatory red. "Unit 412 Delta," Vark growled, his voice a mechanical rasp. "Occupants: Kaelen Voss, thermal scavenger, and Lyraen Sunder, hydroponics laborer." "Where is the man?" Lyraen stood her ground, though I could see the fine tremor in her hands. "My roommate is on a double shift in the cooling bays," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She was using the gray man walk, her shoulders rounded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her voice was devoid of its usual melody, replaced by a dull, tired monotone. Vark ignored her, his cybernetic eye scanning the room with a hum of electronic focus. He was looking for the bioenergetic signature. He was looking for the echo. "We had an energy spike in this sector during the blackout," Vark said, his boots crunching on the debris of the door. "A surge of bioluminescent radiation. Standard readings for a human, but the magnitude was anomalous." "I did not see any surge," Lyraen replied. "The power went out. I was in my pod." Vark stepped closer, his massive form towering over her. He reached out a gloved hand and gripped the suppression collar around her neck. He twisted it, forcing her to look up at him. The clinical light of the collar flickered. "You ethereals are such delicate things," he whispered. "So full of light, and so very easy to break. We found 6 of your kind in the cargo bays this morning. They were uncooperative until we removed their collars." I felt a white-hot rage flare in my gut. I gripped the edge of the vent grating, my knuckles turning white. I had to move. I had to do something. But if I jumped down now, I was a dead man, and she was a prisoner. I needed a distraction. I needed to use the one thing I had sworn never to touch again. I pulled a small silver disc from a hidden pocket in my tool belt. It was a portable Cortex bridge, a piece of illegal military tech I had salvaged from the wreckage of a Vanguard scout ship years ago. It allowed a user to interface directly with any wireless network within 10 meters. It was a cipher's weapon. I pressed the disc to my temple. The world dissolved into a sea of data. The Obsidian Lattice was no longer a structure of metal and stone. It was a sprawling, chaotic web of glowing blue light. I could see the Warden Array's primary logic gates, the security feeds of the enforcers, and the localized environmental controls of the sector. I dived. I bypassed the sector firewall with the ease of a man sliding into a familiar suit of clothes. I found the environmental control for Unit 412 Delta. I did not shut down the lights. I did not trigger the fire alarm. Those were too obvious. Instead, I targeted the primary thermal coupling I had fixed that morning. I sent a command to the internal logic, forcing the valve to open to its maximum capacity while simultaneously cutting the coolant flow. In the room below, the pipes began to hum. Vark frowned, his cybernetic eye twitching. "What is that sound?" The thermal coupling in the wall behind him suddenly screamed. A jet of superheated steam erupted from a pressure valve, filling the tiny apartment with a thick, white cloud of scalding vapor. The enforcers shouted, their visors fogging instantly. "Faulty coupling," Lyraen yelled, dropping to the floor just as I had taught her. "I told the engineer it was failing." Vark swore, backing away from the steam. "Get the scanner out," he barked at his men. "The moisture is scrambling the optics." I did not wait. I pulled the grating free and dropped silently from the vent, landing behind the thick cloud of steam. I moved like a shadow, my movements guided by the data streaming into my mind from the Cortex bridge. I reached Lyraen and grabbed her arm. Not a word, I hissed into her ear. I led her through the steam toward the back of the kitchen where the auxiliary waste chute was located. It was a narrow, disgusting tube designed for organic recycling, but it led directly to the maintenance sub-levels. "Go," I whispered, shoving her toward the chute. "I'll be right behind you." She didn't hesitate. She slid into the darkness of the chute, her movements fluid and silent. I followed a second later, just as the steam began to clear. We tumbled into a pile of synthetic waste 2 levels below. The air here was even worse, a thick soup of rot and chemical sludge. I pulled her to her feet, my head throbbing from the strain of the Cortex bridge interface. I ripped the disc from my temple, and the world of light vanished, replaced by the grim, oily reality of the sublevels. "Are you hurt?" I asked, checking her for burns. "I am fine," she said, her voice shaking. "But Kaelen, Vark, he said they took others. 6 of my people." "I know," I said, my voice hardening. "It was bait. He was looking for you, but he was also clearing the board." The violet light on her skin was a frantic, jagged strobe, even through the collar. "We cannot leave them, Kaelen. They are laborers. They have no protection. If Vark takes them to the command spire, they will be recalibrated." Recalibration was the Tithe's term for a lobotomy. They would strip the ethereals of their echo, leaving them as hollowed-out shells. "We aren't leaving them," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "But we can't go back to the unit. We are officially on the run, Lyraen." "Where do we go?" she asked, looking around the dark, dripping maintenance bay. "There is a place in the Helix market," I said. "A mechanic named Yara. She owes me a favor for a thermal job I did last year. She doesn't ask questions, and she hates the Tithe more than I do." We moved through the sublevels, a ghost and a glowing woman, navigating the skeletal frame of the lattice. Every few minutes we had to flatten ourselves against the cold pipes as a security patrol passed overhead. I could feel the tension in Lyraen, the way her light was struggling against the collar, a pressurized bottle of stars waiting to explode. "You used the bridge," she said quietly as we rested in a disused transit alcove. I felt it. "Your mind, it was like a pulsar. It was cold and bright." "I did what I had to do," I said, not looking at her. "You are a cipher," she whispered, "a vanguard. I heard stories of the humans who could talk to the machines. They said they were the most dangerous men in the galaxy." "I am just a man who knows how to pull wires," I snapped. She didn't push it. She knew I was lying, but she also knew that the lie was the only thing keeping me together. We reached the Helix market 2 hours later. The market was a sprawling, chaotic cylinder of neon lights and synthetic smells, a place where the rules of the Tithe were more of a suggestion than a law. It was the heart of the station's black market, a den of thieves, refugees, and dreamers. Yara's stall was located at the very bottom of the cylinder, tucked between a noodle shop and a salvage yard. The sign above the door read, "Mendes Mechanical. We fix everything but your life." I pushed open the door, a chime sounding in the humid air. A woman with grease-streaked goggles and a sleeveless jumpsuit looked up from a dismantled plasma torch. She had a cigarette dangling from her lip and a look that could peel paint. "Hail," she said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You're late with those filters." "I have a bigger problem, Yara," I said, stepping into the light. Yara looked at me, then her gaze shifted to Lyraen. She took a long drag of her cigarette, her eyes narrowing behind the goggles. "An ethereal and a scavenger's company," she mused. And you look like you just crawled out of a recycling vat. You've been busy, haven't you, Kaelen? We need a place to ground for a few hours, I said. The enforcers are sweeping Wing 7. Yara looked at the door, then back at us. She sighed, blowing a cloud of smoke into the air. My life was so much simpler when I was just fixing broken capacitors. She reached under the counter and hit a button. A hidden panel in the back wall slid open, revealing a small, cramped room filled with spare parts and old data slates. "Get in," she ordered. "And if the tithe heads come knocking, you were never here. I'm charging you 500 credits an hour for the stress." "Make it 600 and give me a clean comm link," I said. Yara grinned, a predatory flash of teeth. "I like the way you think, Ghost." We stepped into the room and the panel hissed shut. It was a tiny sanctuary, but for the first time in hours I felt like I could breathe. I sat on a crate of capacitors, my head in my hands. The strain of the Cortex bridge was starting to take its toll, a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes. Lyraen sat opposite me, her knees pulled up to her chest. She had removed the collar again, and the blue light of her skin was the only thing illuminating the room. It was a soft, steady pulse now, reflecting her attempt to regain her calm. "Kaelen," she said softly, "why did you save me?" I didn't answer for a long time. I thought of EOS 7. I thought of the 50,000 lives I couldn't save because I was too slow, too human, too afraid of the light. "Because I'm tired of being the only one left," I said at last. She reached out, her fingers hovering just millimeters from mine. The honeyed gold light sparked between us, a tiny, defiant warmth in the cold dark of the lattice. "You are not alone, Kaelen Voss," she whispered. "We are the architects of this nightmare, and together we are going to find a way to fix the system." I looked at her, and for a fleeting second, I didn't see an empress or an alien. I saw a partner, a friend, a reason to stop being a ghost. But then the gold light flared into a sharp, terrifying violet. Lyraen gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Someone is calling." I grabbed the comm link Yara had given me. It was a secure, encrypted line. I tapped the activation switch. A voice filtered through, distorted and robotic, but I recognized the cadence. It was Tamsin, my contact in the station's underground news network. "Hail, you there?" Tamsin's voice was frantic. "Roar is moving. He's not waiting for the sensors anymore. He's taking them to the administrative spire. He's going to execute the recalibration in 3 hours." I gripped the comm unit so hard the plastic groaned. 3 hours. "He's doing it in public," Tamsin continued. "He's making it a demonstration. He wants to show the station what happens to assets that hide." I looked at Lyraen. Her light was a frantic, screaming crimson. She knew. She felt the terror of her people. "Kaelen," she whispered, "please." I stood up, the old military steel in my spine finally locking into place. The ghost was gone. The cipher was back. "Yara!" I yelled, banging on the hidden panel. "I need a weapon, and a lot of high-grade explosives." The panel slid open, and Yara stood there, her goggles pushed back, her expression grim. "You're going to the spire, aren't you?" "I'm going to end this," I said. Yara didn't say a word. She just reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy, industrial-grade plasma cutter and a bag of thermal detonators. She slammed them onto the table. "Give them hell, architect," she said. I looked at Lyraen. She stood up, her blue and gold light flowing together in a brilliant, regal display of defiance. She didn't look like a janitor anymore. She didn't even look like a refugee. She looked like the beginning of a revolution. "Ready?" I asked. "Ready," she replied. We stepped out into the Helix market, 2 people against an empire, fueled by a truth that was brighter than any pulsar. The Obsidian Lattice was about to find out that when you push a ghost too far, he starts making things very, very real. The air in the maintenance sublevels of the Obsidian Lattice was a thick, oily soup of recycled humidity and the sharp metallic tang of ozone. We were 3 kilometers beneath the administrative spire, moving through a labyrinth of conduits that the Iron Tithe surveyors had long ago abandoned to the rust in the shadows. Every few seconds, the pulsar Ignis 4 lashed the station with a rhythmic pulse of radiation, and the bulkheads groaned in a way that sounded uncomfortably like a death rattle. I led the way, My industrial plasma cutter slung over my shoulder, its weight a familiar, heavy comfort against my spine. Behind me, Lyraen moved with the practiced, rounded shuffle I had taught her, but the light beneath her skin was a different story. Even through the suppression collar, she was radiating a low-frequency violet, anxiety, sharp and jagged. It hummed against the back of my neck like a swarm of angry hornets. "Kaelen," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hiss of a leaking steam pipe. "The air, it is changing. It feels like static, like a storm is gathering in the marrow of the station." I didn't stop. I couldn't. We had exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes before Archon Vane began the public recalibration of the ethereal hostages. "That's the pulsar," I muttered. "The lattice is struggling to hold the magnetic shielding. It's a mess, Lyraen. The whole bucket is held together by spit and bad intentions." "No," she said, stopping and placing a hand against the vibrating wall. Her fingers glowed with a sudden, intense sapphire. "It is not just the star. The Warden array, it is searching. Not for a person, it is searching for a frequency. It is searching for me." I stopped then, turning back to look at her. In the dim red emergency light, she looked like a fragment of a fallen star trapped in a coal mine. "The Warden is an AI, Lyraen. It doesn't search for frequencies unless someone gives it a very specific ghost ping to follow. Vane must have uploaded a fragment of your signature from the blackout." I looked at the silver disk of the Cortex bridge in my hand. To get to the spire without triggering every internal alarm, I needed to go back in. I needed to dive into the data stream and blind the Warden's eyes. But every time I used the bridge, the ghost got louder. "I have to hook in," I said, more to myself than to her. "Kaelen, the last time—" "It hurt you," she said, her light shifting into a concerned honeyed gold. "Your mind was screaming, even if your voice was silent." "I'm a cipher," I snapped, the old military bitterness rising in my throat. "This is what I was built for. I spent 10 years as a Titan-class decoder for the Vanguard. I've survived worse than a corporate firewall." I sat down on a crate of rusted couplings and pressed the disc to my temple. The transition was a violent, sickening lurch. The physical world, the smell of grease, the sound of Lyraen's breathing, vanished. I was suspended in a void of infinite, glowing architecture. The Obsidian Lattice's digital soul was a jagged obsidian cathedral of code, pulsing with the rhythmic blue light of the pulsar's data pings. I moved through the stream, my consciousness a blade of cold logic. I bypassed the environmental sensors, the life support monitors, and the internal comms. I was looking for the spire's primary security hub, but then the static began. It started as a faint, high-pitched whine, like a distant scream. Then images began to flicker in the periphery of my digital vision. Not station logs, memories. EOS 7. I saw the defense grid dissolving like sugar in water. I saw the civilian transports, thousands of souls trying to launch while the Tide's frigates opened fire. I saw my own hands, younger, steadier, flying across a console, trying to rewrite the encryption that Vane's hackers had compromised. "Kaelen, we're losing the shield. They've got our keys," a voice screamed in my mind. It was Jace, my comms officer. He was 22 years old. He had a wife and a daughter on the surface of the colony. I saw the final command I had sent, a desperate, scorched earth protocol to lock the Tithe out. But I had been too late. I had locked the doors, yes, but I had locked 50,000 people inside a cage while the air was vented into the void. I was the one who turned the key. The data stream around me began to darken, the blue light turning into a suffocating, oily crimson. My digital form was being pulled down into the gravity of the memory. I was flatlining, my consciousness caught in a recursive loop of my own guilt. "Kaelen, come back!" The voice wasn't Jace's. It was melodic, resonant, like a bell ringing through a thick fog. A wave of brilliant, stabilizing silver light washed through the data stream. It didn't belong here. It was organic. It was warm. It was Lyraen. I felt her presence, not as code, but as a vibration, a frequency of pure, uncomplicated empathy. She was using the link we had forged during the blackout, her echo reaching through the Cortex bridge to find me in the dark. I grabbed onto that light. I used it as an anchor, pulling myself out of the crimson sludge of EOS 7. I lunged forward, striking the spire's security hub with the full force of my military-grade decryption. The hub buckled. The Warden Array's eyes in Sector 9 and 10 blinked, then went blind. I ripped the disc from my temple and fell forward, gasping for air. My lungs felt like they were full of glass. Kaelen! Lyraen was there, her hands on my shoulders. Her skin was a frantic, glowing violet. But as I looked at her, it softened back into that honeyed gold. I'm okay, I wheezed, wiping a trickle of blood from my nose. I'm fine. You were gone, she whispered, her eyes wet with a shimmering violet moisture. Your mind was a graveyard, Kaelen. I saw the ships. I saw the fire. I pushed her hands away, my face hardening. You shouldn't have been looking. That's my burden, Lyraen, not yours. We are bound, whether you wish it or not, she said, her voice regaining its imperial steel. The Silver Compact does not allow for secrets. If you drown in your past, I drown with you. You cannot protect me by hiding your scars. I stood up, my legs trembling. I'm not trying to protect you from the scars. I'm trying to keep us alive. The Warden is blind for the next 45 minutes. If we don't move now, EOS 7 is going to happen all over again, right here on this station. I looked at her, and for the first time, the humanistic weight of what we were doing hit me. I had spent years trying to be a ghost because ghosts don't have to feel the weight of the lives they've lost. But Lyraen wasn't a ghost. She was a living, breathing light, and she was forcing me to be real. Let's move, I said, my voice lower, softer. The spire is 2 kilometers ahead. We take the service lift in the waste processing plant. It's dirty, but it's the only way to bypass the internal tithe checkpoints. Then we go together, she said. We moved through the shadows of the maintenance tunnels, a scavenger and a queen, chasing a clock that was ticking toward a massacre. I realized then that my armor of silence wasn't a shield, it was a cage, and Lyraen was the only person in the galaxy who had the key. The Helix market had been a riot of noise and color, but as we approached the inner ring, the station changed. Here the corridors were wider, the lighting a cold, surgical white that made Lyraen's pale skin look like marble. This was where the Iron Tide's executives lived, far above the ozone and the rot of the lower sectors. Every bulkhead was polished, every sensor was brand new, and the air smelled of synthetic jasmine and expensive filtration. It was a place designed to make you feel small, to make you feel like a speck of dust in a corporate machine. We need a way through the transit gate, I whispered, pulling Lyraen into the shadow of a decorative fountain that was currently dry. It's guarded by a squad of tithe puppets. They've got bioscanners that can see through a lead wall. I can dampen the echo, Lyraen said, her light of focused, concentrated blue. But the collar, it is struggling. The frequency vein is broadcasting. It is like a hook pulling at my marrow. I know a guy, I said, the words tasting like copper. An old contact from the Vanguard days. He's a gearhead named Jackson. He runs the Transit Hub's diagnostic center. He owes me his life from a scrap in the Rim Wars. Can we trust him? She asked, her violet eyes searching mine. In the Lattice, you don't trust people, I said, adjusting the plasma cutter on my shoulder. You trust their debts, and Jackson's debt is deep. We found Jackson in a small, cramped office overlooking the transit tracks. He was a wiry man with a face like a dried plum and a prosthetic arm that clicked with every movement. He was hunched over a bank of monitors, his eyes reflecting the cold blue data of the spire. Kaelen, Jackson croaked, standing up so fast his chair hit the wall. Void Walker, I thought you were dead. I heard you went down with the ships at EOS. I'm a ghost, Jackson. Hard to kill what's already gone, I said, stepping into the light. I gestured to Lyraen. This is my partner. We need a clean pass through the gate. 5 minutes. No logs, no scans. Jackson looked at Lyraen, and I saw the moment he realized what she was. His eyes widened, and he took a step back, his prosthetic arm whirring in a nervous, high-pitched whine. An ethereal, he whispered. Kaelen, are you out of your flat-scan mind? Vane has a dead or alive bounty on any unregistered ethereals in the inner ring. He's offering 50,000 marks. That's enough to buy a ticket to the core worlds. A real-life Kaelen, not this rusted-out bucket. I'm not here for a bounty, Jackson. I'm here to settle a debt, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low frequency. I saved your skin on Velonis Prime. I pulled you out of a burning interceptor while the tithe was strafing the field. You promised me a favor. I'm calling it in." Jackson looked at the monitors, then at Lyraen, then back at me. He was sweating, the beads of moisture reflecting the cold white light of the room. He was a man caught between greed and the old code of the Vanguard. "Fine," he spat, turning back to his console. 5 minutes. I'll loop the bioscanner in Bay 3. But you move fast, Kaelen. If the tithe heads catch me aiding a Xeno witch, they'll space me without a trial." "Thanks, Jackson," I said. He tapped a sequence into his console, his movements frantic. "The gate is open. Bay 3. Go." As we turned to leave, I felt a sudden, sharp prickling at the base of my skull. It was a cipher's instinct, a ghost ping that told me the network had just changed. I spun around, my hand flying to my plasma cutter. Jackson was standing at a separate terminal, his prosthetic hand hovering over a silent alarm button. "I'm sorry, Kaelen," he whispered, his face twisted in a mask of desperate greed. "I've got a family. I can't live in the dark anymore. Vane, he's the future. You're just a relic." He slammed his hand down. A siren began to wail, a high-pitched, piercing sound that felt like a needle being driven into my brain. The red emergency lights flared to life, and the heavy, blast-proof doors of the office began to slide shut. "Bug out!" I yelled, grabbing Lyraen's arm. We dived through the closing gap of the doors, the metal teeth missing us by centimeters. We were back in the main corridor of the transit hub, but it was no longer quiet. A squad of Iron Tithe enforcers was already sprinting toward us, their black armor gleaming, their stun rifles raised. "Stop! Do not move!" the lead enforcer roared. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I fired the plasma cutter, the white-hot beam slicing through a structural support column, sending a cascade of debris and sparks between us and the enforcers. It was a temporary barrier, but it wouldn't hold them for long. "This way." I pulled Lyraen toward a service lift, but as we reached the doors, they hissed shut. Locked. We were cornered. 10 enforcers were advancing from one end of the corridor, and a second squad was emerging from the transit gate behind us. We were caught in the open, in the cold white light of the inner ring. "Kaelen," Lyraen said, her voice calm, possessing a terrifying clarity. She reached up and touched the suppression collar. "No," I said, grabbing her hand. "If you take that off here, every sensor on the station will light up. Vane will have your coordinates to the meter." "He already has them, Kaelen," she said, her eyes solid orbs of glowing violet. "Jackson sold us. The mask is gone. If we try to hide now, we die in the dark. But if I show them what I am, we might just have a chance." "It'll kill you, Lyraen. The psionic backlash in this confined space." "Then I die as an empress, not as a janitor," she said. She clicked the release. The suppression collar fell to the floor with a heavy metallic thud. The explosion of light was instantaneous. It wasn't a physical blast, but a wave of pure, unadulterated emotion. Lyraen's skin didn't just glow. It became a sun, a blinding, incandescent strobe of every color in the echo. The sapphire of command, the gold of trust, the violet of anxiety, and a new terrifying silver that was so bright it seemed to hum with the frequency of the pulsar itself. The enforcers screamed. They dropped their weapons, clutching their helmets, their nervous systems overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the Luminous Echo. It was an emotional assault, a direct injection of Lyraen's truth into their minds. They weren't just blinded, they were experiencing the weight of her people's suffering, the history of their displacement, and the fierce, unyielding hope of their queen. The lead enforcer fell to his knees, his visor shattering from the internal pressure of his own panic. I stood in the center of the storm, shielded by the link we shared. For me, the light wasn't an assault. It was a warm, stabilizing embrace. I saw the enforcers not as enemies, but as small, frightened men caught in a storm they couldn't comprehend. "Move!" Lyraen cried, her voice echoing with a power that shook the bulkheads. She grabbed my hand and her touch was like a bolt of lightning. We ran. We ran through the kneeling, sobbing enforcers, past the blind bioscanners, and into the service lift. She slammed her hand against the control panel, her light bleeding into the electronics, overriding the tie's locks. The lift began to rise, moving at a suicidal speed toward the administrative spire. Lyraen collapsed against the wall of the lift, her skin fading to a dull, exhausted gray. The light was almost gone, her reserves depleted by the massive discharge. She was trembling, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I did it, she whispered. I knelt beside her, my heart aching with a mixture of awe and terror. You did it. You showed them, Lyraen. The mask. It is heavy, Kaelen, she said, her violet eyes fluttering shut. I thought that by hiding I was protecting my soul, but it was only by letting it out that I felt free, even if for a moment. I looked at her, and I realized the cost of the lesson. We had spent our lives building masks, building armors of silence and secrecy, thinking they were the only things that could keep us safe. But those masks were the very things that made us vulnerable to men like Jackson and Vane. They were the cages that kept us from seeing the strength in each other. We're almost there, I said, checking my plasma cutter. The lift was approaching the 99th floor. The spire. Kaelen, she said, her hand finding mine. Her skin was cold now, but the honeyed gold light was beginning to flicker back to life, slow and steady. If we don't make it, if the pulsar takes us, don't, I said, squeezing her hand. We're making it. I'm an engineer, remember? I fix things, and I'm going to fix this. The lift chimed. The doors began to slide open, revealing the cold, polished obsidian floors of Archon Vane's private sanctuary. Ready? I asked. Ready, she replied, standing up with a regal grace that no gray overalls could hide. The ghost and the empress stepped out into the heart of the machine. The hunt was over. The battle for the soul of the Obsidian Lattice was about to begin. And this time, we weren't going to hide in the shadows. We were going to be the light. The lift opened into a space that felt less like a command center and more like a mausoleum for the future. The apex of the administrative spire was a sprawling circular chamber, walled and reinforced transparent aluminum that offered a 360-degree view of the pulsar's fury. Below us, the Obsidian Lattice stretched out like a skeletal hand clawing at the light. Above us, the violent, rhythmic strobes of Ignis IV turned the stars into flickering ghosts. There were no guards here, no enforcers, just the hum of 1,000 cooling fans and the smell of ancient, sterile air. In the center of the room sat a massive obsidian throne made of the same light-absorbent material as the station's hull. And sitting in it, looking smaller and more fragile than his legend suggested, was Archon Vane. You're late, Kaelen, Vane said, his voice a dry rasp that barely carried across the expanse of the room. He didn't look up from the holographic display hovering before him. I expected you at 1400 hours. Jackson's alarm was a bit enthusiastic, wasn't it? I kept the plasma cutter leveled at his chest, my boots echoing with a heavy, hollow sound on the polished floor. Lyraen walked beside me, her light a low, cautious violet. She was pale, her breathing shallow, but the strength in her stride was undeniable. The party's over, Vane, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. Shut down the recalibration. Release the hostages, or I'll melt that throne into a puddle of slag. Vane finally looked up. His face was a map of calculated ambition, his eyes two cold, gray stones. He looked at Lyraen, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something that looked like hunger. Release them, Vane chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering over pavement. Kaelen, you were always a brilliant cipher, but you lack the imagination for grand systems. You see 6 laborers. I see the biological processors for the Singularity Protocol. The what? I asked, my finger tightening on the trigger. The Obsidian Lattice was never meant to be a simple mining colony, Vane said, standing up slowly. He leaned on a cane made of dark, polished bone. It was built by the Ethereals as a resonance chamber, a bridge between the cold logic of the machine and the warm, chaotic energy of the Luminous Echo. But the bridge was broken when their empire fell. It lacked the key. He gestured toward Lyraen, the matriarchal sigil, the unique frequency of the royal line. It's not just a pretty pattern on her skin, Kaelen. It's a sovereign authorization code for the station's core. With it, the Warden Array ceases to be a corporate tool. It becomes a god. Lyraen stepped forward, her light deepening into a resonant, authoritative blue. My people did not build this place for gods, Vane. They built it as a sanctuary for harmony. You want to turn a symphony into a weapon. Harmony is just another word for stagnation, Vane spat. The iron tithe is dying. The core worlds are starving for energy. If I can harness the pulsar through the lattice, I can power an empire for 1,000 years. But I need the resonance of the echo to stabilize the quantum gates. The laborers downstairs are just the batteries. You, Lyraen, you are the pilot. I felt the familiar cold weight of the Cortex bridge in my pocket. Vane wasn't just a CEO. He was a fanatic. He was willing to burn an entire race to keep his corporate light bulbs burning. I'm going to the core, I whispered to Lyraen. Kaelen, no, she replied, her hand finding my arm. He's waiting for you to hook in. It's a trap. It's always a trap, I said, my voice low and gritty. But I'm the only one who can talk to the warden. If I can trigger the Silver Compact, I can lock Vane out of the system forever. The Silver Compact? Vane's eyebrows shot up. You found the references in the old archives, didn't you? The myth of the consort protector, the human who could dance with the light. You really think you're that man, Kaelen? You who couldn't even save a colony from its own defense grid? The mention of EO7 hit me like a physical blow. The ghost screamed in my mind, a chorus of 50,000 voices demanding to know why I was still breathing. I'm not that man, I said, my jaw tight, but I'm the man who's standing in front of you now. I sat on the floor, right there in the middle of the spire, and pressed the Cortex bridge to my temple. Bug out, Voss! The ghost of Jace screamed in my ear. I ignored him. I dived. The digital world of the spire was different from the maintenance tunnels. It was a blinding, crystalline lattice of pure data, pulsing with the frantic rhythm of the pulsar. The Warden Array was no longer a distant authority. It was a presence, a cold, vast intelligence that felt like an ocean of ice. Identify, the Warden's voice boomed in the void of my mind. Cipher 73-9er, I transmitted, my consciousness a blade of focused intent. Requesting emergency access to the Singularity Core. Access denied. Sovereign authority required. I pushed harder, my mind straining against the Warden's firewalls. I could feel Vane's counter-prosecution, a heavy, grinding weight of corporate encryption trying to crush my thoughts. He was using the Spire's primary processors to hunt me down. You are a relic, Kaelen, Vane's voice echoed in the data stream. A ghost of a dead alliance. You have no authority here. I felt myself slipping. The cold logic of the machine was too much. It was too fast, too vast. My human mind was being stretched to the breaking point. The static of the pulsar threatening to tear my consciousness into a billion fragments. Then I felt a warmth. It wasn't a piece of code. It wasn't a digital attack. It was a vibration, a melody. Silver light flooded the digital void. Lyraen wasn't just standing in the spire. She was reaching into the bridge with me. She wasn't using a device, or she was using herself. The ethereal biology was built for this. They were the original interfaces. Kaelen, look at me! Her voice rang out, clear and resonant. I turned my digital gaze toward the light. I saw her. Not as a woman in gray overalls, but as a being of pure, incandescent truth. She was showing me her echo, the full, uninhibited map of her soul. She was opening every gate, every secret, every vulnerability. The Silver Compact is not a lock, she told me. It is a resonance. You don't hack it, you join it. I realized then my mistake. I had been trying to fight the machine with its own weapons. Logic, speed, encryption. But the lattice was built for something else. It was built for empathy. I let go of the military protocols. I let go of the cipher blades. I let go of the shame of EOS7. I allowed myself to be seen. I fused my mind into the frequency of her silver light. The reaction was instantaneous. The crystalline lattice of the Warden Array didn't just break, it transformed. The cold blue data turned into a brilliant, pulsing silver. The ocean of ice became a warm, surging tide. Sovereign recognition confirmed, the Warden's voice changed. It was no longer a machine, it was a harmony. The Silver Compact is invoked. The consort protector is recognized. I felt a surge of power that defied description. I was no longer just a man. I was the station. I could feel the heartbeat of the pulsar, the vibration of every thermal coupling, the breathing of every resident in the habitats. I was the lattice. I reached out through the network and found the recalibration chambers in the basement. I felt the 6 ethereal souls, their lights dim and flickering. "Wake up," I whispered through the system. I felt their echoes flare in response, a chorus of 6 voices joining the symphony. In the spire, Vane let out a strangled cry. His holographic displays shattered into a million sparkling shards. His bone-white cane fell from his hand as he stumbled back, his gray eyes wide with a terror he hadn't felt in 50 years. "What have you done?" he gasped, clutching at his chest. "What is this noise?" "It's not noise, Vane," I said, opening my eyes as I pulled the bridge from my temple. My vision was still swimming with silver light, but I had never seen the world more clearly. "It's a song, and you're not invited to the performance." I stood up, and I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt solid. I felt real. I looked at Lyraen, and she was glowing with a silver light so intense it made the pulsar look like a candle. "The core is locked," I said, my voice steady and resonant. "The singularity protocol is dead. The warden belongs to us now." But Vane wasn't finished. He reached into his coat and pulled a small black remote, a dead man's switch. "You think you've won?" he sneered, his face contorted with nihilistic rage. "If I can't have the god, I'll have the sacrifice. The enforcers are already at the holding cells. I've ordered them to vent the air from the entire lower sector. If I don't send a cancel code in 3 minutes, 3,000 people die in the dark. Just like EOS 7, Kaelen, your favorite story." I looked at Lyraen. The violet of anxiety flared in her skin, but she didn't look away. She reached for her hand, and I took it. Our fingers locked, and the silver light between us became a bridge that spanned the room. "We're not going to let that happen," she said. "No," I agreed, looking at Vane with a cold, focused justice. "We're going to rescue them, all of them." The climax of our struggle wasn't a battle of lasers or fists. It was a battle for the soul of the station. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't fighting for a paycheck or a forged ID. I was fighting for the people I had spent my life trying to ignore. I was the architect now, and it was time to rebuild. The administrative spire was a fortress, but a fortress is only as strong as its connections. With the Warden Array under our control, the Iron Tithe was effectively blind, deaf, and dumb. But as we stepped out of the command lift and back into the humid, ozone-heavy air of the lower sectors, I knew the physical battle was just beginning. Vane's dead man switch was ticking. 3,000 lives in Habitat Wing 9 were hanging by a digital thread. "Yara, do you copy?" I barked into my comm link as we sprinted toward the waste processing plant. "Loud and clear, Architect," Yara's gravelly voice crackled back. "The Helix market is in a total tizzy. The enforcers are losing their minds. What's the sit rep?" "Vane's trying to vent Wing 9, I said, my breath coming in heavy gasps. "I need you and every gearhead you can find at the primary atmospheric seals. Do not let those valves open. Use every clamp, every weld, and every prayer you've got." "Copy that. We're moving." "But Kaelen, the enforcers are still armed to the teeth. They're converging on the holding cells. They know you're coming for the ethereals." "Let them come," I said. We reached the entrance to the holding cells, a grim, windowless block of reinforced concrete in the heart of the industrial sector. A squad of 12 enforcers stood guard, their black armor looking like beetles in the dim, red emergency light. They had their stun rifles leveled at the door, their visors down, their postures rigid with the fear of men who didn't know what they were fighting. "Kaelen, wait!" Lyraen said, catching her breath. Her silver light had faded back into a warm, resonant gold, but the power behind it was still palpable. "If we fight them with weapons, we only add to the darkness. There is another way." "They have guns, Lyraen," I said, checking the charge on my plasma cutter, "and they're primed to use them." "They are men, Kaelen," she said, her violet eyes soft and determined. "They are frightened, just as you were. They are following orders because they don't know how to follow their hearts. Let me speak to them." "It's suicide," I whispered. "It is vulnerability," she countered. "It is the Silver Compact in action." Before I could stop her, She stepped out from the shadow of the conduit. She didn't hide. She didn't shuffle. She walked with the grace of 1,000 queens, her head held high, her hands open at her sides. She removed the suppression collar and dropped it on the floor. It clattered with a lonely metallic sound. The enforcers stiffened, their rifles tracking her movement. "Do not fire!" the squad leader roared. "It's the asset. Take her alive!" Lyraen didn't stop. She walked until she was only 5 meters away from the line of black armor. Then she closed her eyes and began to hum. It wasn't the sharp, aggressive assault she had used in the transit hub. It was a low, soothing vibration, like the sound of a mother singing to a restless child. As she hummed, the light began to flow from her skin. It wasn't silver or sapphire. It was a soft, pulsing yellow, the color of resonance, the color of trust. The light didn't hit them like a wave. It flowed around them like a warm mist. I watched from the shadows, my heart in my throat. I saw the enforcers' rifles begin to dip. I saw their shoulders sag. One by one, they reached up and clicked open their visors. Behind the black masks were faces I recognized. A man from the hydroponics vats, a young recruit who used to buy synthetic noodles at the stall next to mine. They weren't monsters. They were neighbors who had been taught to be soldiers. "We are not your enemies," Lyraen's voice rang out, melodic and clear. "We are the breath of this station. The air you breathe, the water you drink, it is all shared. Why do you guard a cage when you could be guarding a home?" The squad leader, a man with a heavy gray beard, looked at his rifle, then at Lyraen. He looked like a man waking up from a long, feverish dream. The director said, "He said you were a hazard," the leader whispered, his voice shaking. "The only hazard here is the fear in your heart," Lyraen said, stepping closer. She reached out and placed a glowing golden hand on his armored chest. "Can you feel it? The rhythm of the station? It is the same as your own." The leader let out a long, shuddering breath. He dropped his rifle. It hit the deck with a heavy thud. Following his lead, the other 11 enforcers lowered their weapons. Some of them sat down on the floor, overwhelmed by the sudden, intense clarity of the echo. I stepped out from the shadows. My plasma cutter lowered. I felt a surge of respect for Lyraen that transcended words. She hadn't defeated them. She had redeemed them. "Open the cells," I said to the squad leader. He nodded, fumbling with his security card. The heavy blast doors hissed open. The 6 ethereal laborers were huddled in the back of the cell, their skin a dull, aching gray. But as Lyraen entered, their lights flared to life in a sympathetic resonance. A chorus of blue and gold filled the room, turning the grim prison into a sanctuary of light. "You are safe," Lyraen told them, her voice full of a fierce, protective love. "The architect is here. We are going home." We led the laborers out of the cells, escorted by the very enforcers who had been guarding them 10 minutes ago. It was the strangest procession in the history of the Obsidian Lattice, a line of glowing aliens and armored humans moving together through the industrial haze. But we still had one more fire to put out. "Yara, status!" I yelled into my comm. "We're at the seals, Kaelen." Yara's voice was strained, the sound of metal grinding in the background. "The valves are vibrating like crazy. Vane's override is trying to force them open. We've got every man on the line holding the manual levers, but the pressure is too high. We can't hold it." "I'm coming," I said. I looked at Lyraen. "I need the bridge, one more time. I have to hit the atmospheric subroutine from the local terminal." "I'm with you," she said. We reached the primary atmospheric hub, a massive chamber filled with the roaring sound of pressurized oxygen. Yara and her crew of mechanics were there, their faces red with effort as they leaned against the massive iron wheels of the manual overrides. The valves were screaming, a high-pitched whine that signaled imminent failure. "Kaelen, about time!" Yara yelled, her goggles covered in frost. "The system's fighting us. It's like the warden is trying to kill itself." I didn't waste time. I sat down at the local terminal and pressed the bridge to my temple. The digital world was a storm of red alerts and screaming sirens. Vane's scorched earth protocol was a virus, a self-replicating loop of destruction that was eating its way through the life support logic. It wasn't just a command, it was a suicide note. I tried to cut the feed, but the virus was too fast. It was rewriting the base code of the valves faster than I could delete it. I've got you, Kaelen. Lyraen's voice echoed in my mind. She placed her hands on the terminal, and the silver light flowed from her into the machine. It didn't just stabilize the data, it humanized it. She was injecting her echo directly into the life support subroutines. Listen to the breath, she whispered to the system. The station is a body. The air is its blood. You do not kill the body to save the cell. The silver light met the red virus. It didn't fight it. It absorbed it. It showed the virus the beauty of the life it was trying to destroy. It showed the machine the faces of the people in Wing 9. It showed the warden the gold and sapphire light of the ethereal children. The red alerts began to fade. The screaming sirens died down to a gentle hum. The valves stopped vibrating. The roaring sound of the pressure died away, replaced by the steady, rhythmic hiss of a system in equilibrium. Atmospheric integrity confirmed, the warden announced, its voice warm and harmonious. Override terminated. Have a peaceful evening. I pulled the bridge from my temple and slumped against the terminal. My head felt like it had been through a centrifuge, but the silence in the room was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Yara let out a wild, jubilant yell, throwing her wrench into the air. The mechanics cheered, embracing each other, humans and ethereals alike. Lyraen stood over me, her silver light fading into a soft, exhausted blue. She looked down at her hands, then at me. She smiled, and it was the first time I had seen her truly happy. We fixed it, Kaelen, she whispered. We did, I said, taking her hand. We had faced the darkness, the ghosts, and the machine. We had chosen vulnerability over armor, resonance over logic, and justice over revenge. The Obsidian Lattice was still a rusted-out bucket, and we were still orbiting a murderous pulsar. But for the first time in its history, the station wasn't just surviving, it was living. The transformation had begun. It was painful, it was messy, and it was far from over. But as I looked at the mingled crowd of survivors, I knew that the old way was gone. The singularity was no longer a corporate myth. It was us. The silence that followed the restoration of atmospheric integrity was not the empty, terrifying void of a blackout. It was a heavy, expectant thing, like the pause between two movements of a symphony. In the primary atmospheric hub, the air was still thick with the white mist of released vapor, but the screaming of the valves had died down to a gentle, rhythmic thud. Yara and her crew of gearheads stood in the haze, their faces smeared with grease and sweat, looking at their hands as if they didn't quite believe they were still attached. I leaned against the primary control terminal, my lungs burning, my head feeling like it had been cracked open and filled with molten lead. The Cortex bridge was a cold weight in my palm, a dead piece of silver that felt like a relic from a different lifetime. I looked at Lyraen. She was sitting on the floor, her back against a cooling pipe, her skin a soft, exhausted indigo. The silver light of the silver compact was gone, but the resonance remained, a faint golden hum in the air around her. Status, Yara, I croaked, my voice sounding like it had been dragged through 3 kilometers of gravel. Yara wiped her goggles with a rag that was arguably dirtier than her face. Seals are holding, Architect. Pressure is stabilizing across all sectors. We lost about 4% of the total volume in Wing 9 before the override kicked in, but nobody's been spaced. We've got some cases of hypoxia, but Doc Soren is already on the scene with the med teams. She paused, looking at the squad of enforcers who were still standing near the entrance. Their visors up, their expressions a mixture of dazed awe and bone-deep fatigue. What about the tithe heads, she asked, her hand drifting toward a heavy wrench. The lead enforcer, the man with the gray beard whose name tag read Marcus, stepped forward. He didn't reach for his sidearm. He didn't even look like a soldier anymore. He looked like a man who had just realized his entire life had been a lie. The orders they were wrong, Marcus said, his voice trembling. He looked at Lyraen, then at me. We didn't know about the Scorch protocol. We were told we were protecting the station from a biohazard. Vane, he was going to kill us all just to spite you. Vane's done, I said, and the words felt like a gavel striking a block of obsidian. The warden has stripped his executive privilege. He's currently locked in the spire with nothing but his own ego to keep him company. Lyraen stood up slowly, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. She walked toward Marcus. The other enforcers tensed, but she didn't strike. She simply placed a hand on his armored shoulder. A faint, honeyed gold light sparked at the point of contact. "You chose to see," she said softly. "That is the hardest thing for a man with a weapon to do. Do not carry the weight of Vane's crimes. Carry the weight of the peace you helped keep." Marcus looked like he was going to cry. He nodded, a sharp, jerky movement, and turned to his men. "Secure the perimeter. No lethal force. We're here to help the engineering crews. If anyone asks, we're under the command of the architect." I watched them move out, a squad of black-armored enforcers working alongside the greasy mechanics of the Helix market. It was a sight I never thought I'd see in the Obsidian Lattice. It was the humanistic theme in motion, the realization that we weren't just specks of dust in a corporate machine, but a community that had been systematically taught to fear its own shadow. "We need to deal with Jackson," Lyraen said, turning back to me. Her violet eyes were clear now, the sapphire of command beginning to return. "I'll handle it," I said. "No," she countered. "We handle it, together." We found Jackson in the Transit Hub's diagnostic center, exactly where we had left him. He hadn't run. He couldn't. The warden had locked down the entire sector during the climax. He was sitting at his console, his head in his prosthetic hand, the cold blue light of the monitors reflecting off his thinning hair. When the door hissed open, he didn't look up. "I heard the broadcast, Kaelen," he said, his voice flat and lifeless. "The data dump. Kestrel 9, EOS 7, Vane's secret accounts. You really did it, didn't you? You burned the world down." "I didn't burn it down, Jackson. I just let the light in," I said, walking to the edge of his desk. "Why? 50,000 marks? Was that really the price of my life?" Jackson finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, full of a desperate, pathetic self-loathing. "It wasn't just the money, Kaelen. It was the hope. I'm 65 years old. My lungs are half full of industrial dust. My arm clicks every time I breathe. I just wanted to see a sun that wasn't a pulsar before I died. Vane promised me a transport to the core worlds, a real garden, real air." I looked at him, a broken man who had betrayed his only friend for a dream of a garden that Vane would have never let him see. In the old days in the Vanguard, I would have put a plasma bolt through his head without a second thought. That was the military way. That was the ghost way. But Lyraen was standing beside me, her light a steady, compassionate blue. "The core worlds are a lie built on the backs of stations like this one," I said, and I felt the rage in my chest begin to dissolve into a heavy, aching pity. "You sold your soul for a hologram, Jackson." "I know," he whispered. He held out his hands, the metal of the prosthetic glinting. "Call the enforcers. I'm ready." I looked at Lyraen. She didn't speak. She was letting me choose. This was the test. Was I still the man who turned the key at EO 7? Or was I something else? "You're a hell of a gearhead, Jackson," I said. "And this station is falling apart. We need every hand we can get to rebuild the Warden's empathy protocols. You want to see a garden? We're going to build one in the hydroponics bay. A real one. With Luminara flowers and real soil." Jackson stared at me, his mouth hanging open. You're not spacing me." "I'm putting you to work," I said. "The debt isn't settled, Jackson. You're going to spend the rest of your life paying it back to the people of this station. That's your sentence." I turned and walked out, not waiting for his answer. As the door hissed shut, I heard a sound I'd never heard from Jackson before, a sob of absolute, crushing relief. "You are a very strange ghost, Kaelen Voss," Lyraen said as we walked toward the observation deck. "I'm learning," I said. We stood at the viewport, watching the pulsar. Ignis 4 was still spinning, still lashing the void with its blue radiation. But inside the lattice, the rhythm had changed. The air felt lighter. The vibration in the deck plating felt like a hum of activity rather than a groan of decay. For the next 72 hours, the Obsidian Lattice underwent a transformation that defied every corporate manual ever written. The suppression mandate was formally abolished. Thousands of ethereals removed their collars, and the station began to glow with a chaotic, beautiful rainbow of echoes. Blue for peace, gold for trust, violet for the lingering anxiety of a people who were finally free. Archon Vane was escorted from the spire in simple, non-tactical restraints. He wasn't taken to a cell. He was taken to a transport ship bound for a neutral alliance tribunal. As he passed through the Helix market, a crowd of thousands watched in absolute silence. There were no stones thrown, no screams for blood, just a quiet, powerful witnessing of a man whose time had passed. I stood with Yara at the edge of the market, watching the transport launch. "You think the tithe will come back for us?" Yara asked, lighting a cigarette that actually smelled like real tobacco. A gift from a high-level executive who had been encouraged to share his stash. "They'll try," I said. "But the Warden Array is no longer a corporate asset. It's a sovereign entity now, bound by the Silver Compact. If a tithe fleet enters this sector, the Lattice will simply refuse to recognize their codes. We're not a mining colony anymore, Yara. We're a nation." "Soon. A nation of ghosts and gearheads," Yara chuckled, blowing a cloud of smoke toward the ceiling. "I like it, Architect. I like it a lot." I looked up at the spire. The silver light was still there, a faint, constant aura at the very top of the station. Lyraen was up there, meeting with the first session of the Lattice Assembly. She was no longer an empress in hiding. She was a leader in the light. I felt a sudden sharp pang of loneliness, a remnant of the old Kaelen who preferred the shadows. But then my wrist comm vibrated. A single melodic chime. Kaelen. The thermostat in the spire is set to 24. It is an indulgence. Come and argue with me. A smile touched my lips. A real, genuine smile that didn't feel like a mask. "I've got to go," I told Yara. "Go on, Voidwalker," she said, waving me off. "The station isn't going to fix itself. But the coffee's on you tomorrow." "Deal," I said. I walked toward the lift, my stride even and confident. I wasn't rounding my shoulders anymore. I wasn't looking at the floor. I was Kaelen Voss, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 1 year later, the Obsidian Lattice was no longer a jagged tick on a dying star. It had become a jewel. Under the combined efforts of the new Engineering Guild and the Ethereal Resonance teams, the station's hull had been reinforced with a shimmering, bioluminescent alloy that absorbed the pulsar's radiation and converted it into clean, sustainable energy. From a distance, the station looked like a swirling nebula of silver and gold, a beacon of life in the cold dark of the Ignis 4 sector. I stood in the center of the great garden in the hydroponics ring, the smell of damp earth and blooming luminera flowers filling my senses. It was 1600 hours, a time we now celebrated as the Golden Cycle, when the pulsar's pulses were at their most rhythmic and calm. I wasn't wearing my gray fatigues anymore. I wore a simple, dark tunic of ethereal weave, durable but elegant, and on my chest, where my military dog tags used to hang, was a small silver pin shaped like a thermal coupling, a reminder of where I came from. "The nitrogen levels are perfect, Kaelen," a voice said from behind a thicket of feathery ferns. Jackson stepped out, carrying a nutrient scanner. He looked 10 years younger. His prosthetic arm had been replaced with a high-fidelity ethereal model that moved with a fluid, silent grace. He spent his days tending the gardens and his nights teaching the younger generation of mechanics how to talk to the machines without using a hammer. "Good work, Jackson," I said. "How are the Luminara doing?" "They're reflecting a deep sapphire today," he said, gesturing to the bed of translucent white flowers. "Peace. The station is happy." I nodded, feeling the steady, warm hum of the Warden Array in the back of my mind. The AI was no longer a cold judge. It was a partner, a consciousness that had been shaped by a year of empathy and shared experience. It didn't just monitor the oxygen, it understood the weight of the breath. I left the garden and made my way to the spire. I didn't take the service lift. I took the main glass elevator, watching the station pass by. I saw human and ethereal children playing together in the plazas. I saw markets filled with goods from across the sector. I saw a world that had chosen to be seen. When I entered the command chamber, Lyraen was standing by the viewport. She was dressed in a gown of pure, flowing light, her echo a brilliant, stable silver that lit up the entire room. She didn't turn around when I entered, but I felt her resonance reach out to me, a warm, honeyed gold that wrapped around my heart. "The Alliance delegation has arrived at the transit gate," she said, her voice like the chime of a distant bell. "They are here to sign the recognition treaty. The Obsidian Lattice is officially a sovereign protectorate." "It's a long way from a thermal coupling in Wing 9, I said. walking up to stand beside her. She turned and looked at me, her violet eyes full of a wisdom that seemed to span centuries. We did not just fix the station, Kaelen. We fixed the future, for my people and for yours. I looked at her, and then I looked out at the pulsar. I thought about the journey we had taken, from a cramped apartment in a shared silence to the leadership of a new society. I thought about the mask we had shed and the light we had found in each other's scars. I stepped forward, and for the first time in a public space, I didn't hesitate. I took her hand. Our fingers locked, and the silver light between us flared, a perfect correlate of resonance. We weren't just partners or allies. We were the architects. I looked at my reflection in the transparent aluminum. I saw a man who was no longer haunted by the ghosts of EO7. I saw a man who had accepted that he couldn't change the past, but he could absolutely build the future. I had learned that the only thing more dangerous than a man with a weapon is a man who is afraid to be seen. And the only thing more powerful than an empire is a simple act of respect. I spent 38 years of my life building the most sophisticated armor a man can wear. Silence. I thought that if I didn't let anyone in, the ghosts of the people I'd lost couldn't get out. I believed that my scars were a map of my failures, a cartography of shame that I had to hide beneath gray fatigues and mechanical logic. I called myself a ghost because it was easier than being a man who had to carry the weight of a world that ended because he wasn't fast enough, wasn't good enough. But standing here now in the light of a silver sun we built together, I realize how wrong I was. Hiding didn't protect me. It just kept me cold. It turned my heart into a rusted thermal coupling, struggling to hold a heat it was never meant to contain alone. I learned that vulnerability isn't the absence of strength. It is the foundation of it. It takes a certain kind of raw, terrifying courage to take off the mask and say, "This is me, broken and messy and full of light." The ethereals don't hide their light because they are weak. They show it because it is the only way to be true. And once you've seen the truth in someone else, once you've allowed them to see the truth in you, you can never go back to being a ghost. You become a participant. You become an architect. You realize that the stars aren't just points of light in a vacuum. They are the resonance of every soul brave enough to burn. I looked at Lyraen, and then I looked out at the thousands of lights twinkling across the lattice. "Lyraen," I asked, my voice a soft murmur in the quiet room, "do you think they're still afraid? The people out there?" She squeezed my hand, her gold light warming my skin. "Some of them. Fear is an old habit, Kaelen. It takes time to learn a new rhythm." "I suppose it does," I said. I looked at the silver disk of the Cortex bridge sitting on the console. It was a tool, nothing more. I didn't need it to talk to her anymore. I didn't need it to see the world. I wonder, as I stand here at the edge of this new era, how many of us are still living in our own versions of Habitat Wing 9? How many of us are hiding our own luminous echoes behind collars of habit or shame or the fear of being misunderstood? We spend so much energy building walls to protect our hearts, but those same walls keep out the very light we need to heal. If you could take off your mask today, if you could show just one person the true colors of your soul without fear of judgment, what would that light look like? And more importantly, what is stopping you from letting it shine? I let go of her hand, but only for a moment. I walked to the primary control console and entered a final command. It wasn't a military code or a corporate override. It was a simple station-wide broadcast. "Light cycle initiated. Open the viewports. Let the light in." Across the Obsidian Lattice, 10,000 shutters slid open at once. The station wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a heart, beating in time with the stars. I walked back to Lyraen and stood in the silver glow, a man finally perfectly at home. The luminara flowers in the garden below pulsed a brilliant, steady sapphire, and for the first time in history, the pulsar Ignis IV seemed to wink in approval.